Let me share the screen with you. Okay. All right. Any questions before I start? Anything from the last class? No?
Sir,
Yes.
sir, there was a point where you were explaining the trade-off between the profit maximization and efficiency.
Right.
Could you please explain that point once more, if possible?
Yeah. Yeah. So what was happening in that model, the first Benabou-Tirole paper that we studied the last time, uh, basically the agent has some amount of intrinsic motivation, but the agent is unsure about the probability of success of the project, right? If the success probability is low, then the agent doesn't have enough motivation, enough intrinsic motivation. So that has to be supplemented in that case with extrinsic rewards. That was the situation. But if the success probability is high, then no reward is necessary. If the agent somehow comes to know of that, that'll be motivating enough, yeah, for hard work. Now, a profit maximizing principle in this situation will try to game it, right? Even when the principal knows that success probability is low, the principal will claim that the success probability is actually high, so that he doesn't have to offer any rewards or bonuses. So he saves his money if he can convince the agent that he has a high chance of success, right? And as a result, the agent will not believe it unless the coach puts his money where his mouth is, right? The coach has a reason to take aside every young cricketer and say, "You're the next Virat Kohli, go and practice hard." Uh, so unless he backs it up with, some reward or something, or that's in play, there's going to be a credibility problem. Now, if the principal was known to be benevolent, not a profit maximizer, right? The principal wants to maximize efficiency in society. If it costs him a lot of money, so be it, right? Then the principal can come up with a contract where he says that, look, I'll give you a reward if um, I'll give you a bonus if you're low ability to make up for your low expected payoff. But if you're high ability, I'll tell you that, and I won't give you any reward. Since he's not trying to save money, since he's not a profit maximizer, in that case, he will be credible, yes? And as a result, efficiency will always obtain, right? The agents will always believe it. The high ability types will work hard due to intrinsic motivation. The low ability types will work hard because of the bonus that is given to them. In the profit maximizing case, when we characterize the equilibrium, we found that the principal sometimes doesn't offer a bonus even to the low ability types. And at any rate, because the agent is skeptical, the agent doesn't work hard if the signal falls below a certain threshold, right? So there's positive probability that the high effort level will not be chosen, and that's the inefficiency there.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. And I was also mentioning that this is a common theme which you see in many kind of models involving adverse selection or moral hazard. that if the principal is a profit maximizer in his desire to cut costs, it doesn't max out on the efficiency aspect. Right? It becomes too costly to go all the way to the first best. Okay, so today I'll talk about the second Benabou-Tirole paper, which I have listed in your reading list. And this is motivated by the same sort of observations or experiments that, there are contexts where we find that monetary rewards or penalties don't have the desired effect, they have the opposite effect, right? Monetary rewards actually depress performance and productivity rather than increasing it. So this is a different explanation and this is a different story. And there's another theoretical model to go with it. I'm going to present to you a much simplified version of the model that you see in the paper. And that's true for many of the papers we are discussing, because I want to bring out the sort of essential point in as simple a way as possible. Okay, so I want to start with another sort of case study or example. Now, I'm not sure if I talked about in your first year micro class. Did I talk about the blood donation issue?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I'll very quickly summarize it, right? There was a debate in the 1970s between some real stalwarts, not only in economics, but also in other fields like philosophy. So Richard Titmuss, the British sociologist in 1971, he wrote a book. He put together some data, some figures. It wasn't the most rigorous econometrics that you will come across, but it was tentative, suggestive data. And he said that the blood transfusion system in America is worse than in Britain. Now, Britain had a voluntary blood donation system. It was illegal to pay if somebody gave blood, right? It was not allowed by law. Whereas Americans had a hybrid system, right? You could donate for free, but you could also give blood for a payment. So Richard Titmuss argued that, because the American system allowed payments, somehow it made it worse. There were less supply, there was lower quality as well as quantity, and various problems relative to the British system. Now, after that book came out, Robert Solow and Kenneth Arrow, two stalwarts in economics, they jumped in and a debate started in this journal, Philosophy and Public Affairs, where they said that this doesn't make any sense because supply curves are supposed to be positively sloped, right? If you raise the price of something, in this case, giving blood, then the supply of that should go up. It cannot come down, right? There will be generous people who give blood out of the goodness of their hearts to help their fellow citizens. There's no reason why those people still won't continue, if there's a payment on the table. And when a payment is on offer, other people who are not that generous may start giving blood because, the deal is sweetened with money. So supply can only go up, was their argument. And then Peter Singer, the philosopher, also jumped in. He took the side of Richard Titmuss. He said, no, he has a point. So there was a very lively debate back and forth. Now, let me mention one thing which is there in Peter Singer's article. At some point, he makes this point, which I won't get into detail, but I want to mention it because I think it's an interesting and plausible point. So Singer quotes somebody who was interviewed in the British press, right? Somebody went in and gave blood in the hospital, not for a relative, not for a friend, but to the general blood bank. And when the woman was coming out, she was interviewed by a reporter, and she said, she was asked, why did you give blood, right? It'll go to some patient who you don't even know, right? Somebody anonymous. And the reply was to try and repay in some small way some unknown person whose blood helped me recover from 2 operations and enabled me to be with my family. So this woman who gave blood some time earlier had fallen seriously ill, and she was in the hospital, and she got blood from the blood bank, right? And that partly helped her in her recovery from what she was suffering from. So she said that I felt gratitude and a debt, a moral debt, right? Not an economic debt, a moral debt, that somebody's blood saved me, so I have to pay it back to society in general. So when I became healthy, I made my contribution. So the sentiment expressed here is, you can uh, call it reciprocity, right? One good turn deserves another, that sort of sentiment. So Peter Singer said that, this is part of many people's psychology, that we have this reciprocity instinct. So if you're in a system where when we ourselves need blood, we paid for it and got it, then we think that, oh, we have already paid for it, so I don't have to give back anything. But if it's a voluntary system and I get it for free, some generous soul's generous act saved my life, then I feel that I have to give back. And so I'll go back later when healthy. So the desire to sort of reciprocate somebody else's good deed. That's so he said, giving blood is not like, selling apples. There's a moral dimension to it, and this reciprocity aspect. And perhaps that's why supply curves may not be positively sloped. They may have the opposite slope, right? You pay and people don't feel the urge to pay back. Okay, but this is not the line we are going to pursue today. Yeah, we are going to pursue another line of thought. And here, there's this experiment, and this is what I think I talked about in your micro lectures, but I'll quickly recap. So this hospital in Sweden had this experiment, this randomized controlled trial, right? People were asked to donate blood. They had a day when there was a blood camp which was set up. And the subjects were divided into 3 groups. The subjects were the students of the university. One group was asked, will you give blood? For nothing, right? No rewards. That's treatment 1. Treatment 2 was people in the second group were paid approximately $7 if they agreed to give blood. And people in the third group would be paid the same amount, but they couldn't pocket it. They had to donate it to a charity of their choice, right? Now, if you take the standard economic argument that supply curves should be positively sloped, that when the rewards are bigger, more supply should be forthcoming, then you would guess that in the second group, there would be the maximum positive responses, followed by the third, and the last place would be treatment 1, where nobody was offered any reward. I mean, not to say that it'll be 0, right? But relatively, treatment 1 should elicit the smallest response. That's what we would expect. But when you look at the results of the experiment, you find that it's exactly the opposite. And especially if there's the subjects are broken up by gender, then for the female subjects, it's in the most high reward treatment, the percentage of blood donors is significantly less, not more. Okay, so it drops from 50% to 30%. So that's yet another example of counterproductive monetary incentives. Yeah. So how do we understand this experiment, these results? So before I talk about the Benabou-Tirole paper, let's mull it in our minds a little bit more. Yeah. So here are some 2 quotations which I put down. The second quotation is from the novel, Albert Camus' novel, The Fall. So this is a story where there's a lawyer in Paris, right, who's considered to be the model citizen, right? He's very generous. He helps others. He does pro bono work for poor people. He helps old ladies cross the street and so on, right? So everybody is full of praise for him because he's such a generous fellow. And then one night, as he's walking along the river, and it's cold and it's a winter night, he sees a young woman on a bridge about to jump into the river and commit suicide. And he doesn't stop her, right? He doesn't, when she jumps in, he doesn't jump in to try and save her. And that sort of triggers some sort of conscience in him. He said, apparently I do all these generous acts. Why did I not act on that night? And he comes to realize that he does those generous acts when other people are watching, right? So there's a reputational gain which he enjoys. And that was missing on that night when there was nobody around. So his intrinsic generosity wasn't enough if it was not reinforced by a boost to his reputation. So that's one idea. Now, here's another experiment which is kind of related. It's from William Harbaugh's paper, 1998 paper. And this is quite clever. So there was this law school in the US, right? In their annual book, they would publish the list of benefactors or donors, people who donated to the law school and helped them. Earlier, they used to publish the whole list of names, and against each name, they would publish how much they contributed, right down to the last penny, the exact amount. And then the list was getting too long, and so they decided to do a sort of block-based reporting, meaning that they would create certain ranges or blocks. People donating $100 or less could be one block, then $100 to $500 could be another block, and 500 to 1,000. So they created slabs like that. And in each slab, they published the list of names whose donations came in that slab without publishing the exact amount, right? So that was the switch in reporting strategies. Yeah. So what happened? So the author here has data on donation sizes under the old regime when individual donations were reported, versus in the new reporting scheme when only block-based reporting was adopted, right? Did anything change? Did the sort of aggregate pattern of donations changed? And what he finds is, yes, it does, right? And here's a picture from the paper which shows the following, that at most amounts, donation levels went down, right? So just to be clear, let's say we are looking at $100 to $500, that block, right? In the old regime, some people donated 100, some people 200, some people 300. There were many observations in this range. In the new regime, we have another set of observations in this range, right? Did the pattern change within this range and within other ranges? And this is what he found, that at many levels, the total number of contributions went down, right? So, but there were some values where there was a spike, right? So these are the bars which shoot upwards. But at most other levels, it dropped. And if you look at the amounts, you should be able to understand what's going on really, right? There's a spike at 100, there's a spike at 250, there's a spike at 500, there's a spike at 1,000. So can you guess what's going on?
So they just pay the threshold to get in the next category.
Yeah. So suppose I was, say, there's a category below $100 and then 100 to something, right? And I was thinking of contributing $90. And on this regime, I feel, if I just put in, if I contribute $90, people will think I'm a cheapskate. because they won't know it's 90. They'll think, it's under 100 something, average, I don't know, 50 maybe. But if I just add a little bit extra, $10, then I can cross over the threshold to the next level. So I'll be reported not as in the lowest slab, but in the next slab. So in that case, I will do that. On the other hand, if somebody was contributing $450, let's say, right? So they're at the upper end of that slab. So they might think, why are we if I contribute, if I lower my contribution from 450 to 100, the lower point of this range, nobody will know, nobody will notice that, right? I'll still be in the same block. My name will appear in the same category. So let me save some money and dropped out. So that's what seems to be creating these spikes and these drops, right? So people seem to be caring about their image, right? What other people think when their name comes up on that list, what other people think about their wealth, their generosity, etc. That seems to be one of the motivators. Okay, so even charity, undoubtedly these people are not like completely selfish, right? They're donating for a cause. This is money they're not spending on themselves. They're helping an academic institution. But of course, they're weighing between many competing ends of their money. And other than generosity, image consciousness seems to be playing a role, right? That's what this pattern reveals. So, let me summarize the main point in the Benabou-Tirole paper, and then I'll get to the model in the next slide. So in many of these kinds of contexts, you can think of three main reasons why people may engage in what they call pro-social behavior. This term has become quite, has a lot of usage these days, meaning that, when your behavior does involve some concern for others, for society at large, right? Not just yourself. You're not just spending purely on your own consumptions and needs and pleasures. So there may be three reasons why you may behave in a way which benefits society at large or other people. One is extrinsic motivation. Yes. One is rewards and penalties, standard monetary rewards and penalties, right? So I will donate blood. I will, if they're paying me, I will drive carefully and not obey traffic rules if there's a chance of getting a stiff fine. I will, not litter once again, throw garbage here and there if the police are finding people for doing so. That's extrinsic motivation, right? That motivation is not driven by concern for others. It's driven by, my own concerns. I want to avoid the fines and I want to capture the rewards. Okay. A second possible reason could be intrinsic motivation, like we have been discussing. But here, what comes in an additional thing is reputational motivation, right? Part of the reason why I may be doing these good things is that I'm worried that others will think I'm a bad person, or I'm tempted to make others think that I'm a good person, right? So we have extrinsic motivation, intrinsic motivation, and reputational motivation. The difference between intrinsic motivation and reputational motivation is that intrinsic motivation is genuinely caring about others. I really do want to help them. That's the part of my motivation. Reputational motivation is where I want you guys to think that I want to help people, right? So that's distinct.
Sir, but these three things are not mutually exclusive.
No, they're not mutually exclusive. So in the model, as you will see, very soon, they interplay. And all these stories are interesting because, they interplay. And one of the main points is that, extrinsic motivation, if we lay on too much extrinsic motivation, monetary fines and rewards, then it may undermine some of these other motives. And in this story, especially the reputational motive. and it may crowd out the reputational motive to act nice. And it may crowd it out enough in some situations that the net effect on good behavior is actually negative. Okay, so that's the point, as I just said. Increasing rewards increases the extrinsic motivation part, but may damage the reputational motivation part. So there are two sort of key results that I'm going to talk about. One is this crowding out effect, which I just mentioned, and that's going to be the most important point in this paper and this analysis. But there's another point which is also noteworthy, which is the possibility of multiple equilibria. Okay, so you can have two societies which are fundamentally identical, meaning that people's preferences, their abilities, they're all the same, right? But one of them may display a lot of good behavior, pro-social behavior, lots of people donating blood, people generally not breaking traffic rules, low rates of crime, etc. Whereas another society with the same fundamentals may display a lot of bad behavior, right? People driving like maniacs, they're littering the streets, they're engaging in all kinds of antisocial behavior rather than pro-social. So that multiplicity is an interesting possibility that arises here. Any questions?
Sir?
Yes.
Sir, in the Swedish experiment, why do we see a difference in trend of the observation between men and women?
I don't know. I mean, there's presumably in that group, there's some difference in thinking. Maybe women were more concerned that, so the idea is that, why would you, when they're not offering you money, you say, yes, I'll give blood. But when they offer you money, then you say, no, are offended and you go away. Well, maybe because you think that, well, if I give money and they put some, give blood and they give some money in my hand, people may think that I'm doing it for the money. So if you're very concerned about that, then you may have a negative response rate, right? When there's no money on offer, whoever learns that you did this good thing knows for sure that you did it out of the goodness of your heart, right? Whereas they're paying me $10 and I go and, give blood and people will say behind my back that, oh, he'll do anything for $10, right? So then I might have cold feet and not do it. Now, it so happens that in this particular experiment, we see some gender difference in that sort of reaction, but yeah. We don't want to generalize too much, right? On the gender aspect. I mean, it's more the sort of underlying thinking which is interesting. Okay, so let me show you the model, okay? And I'll do two versions of the model to make the two separate points. So to begin with, there's two actions, 0 and 1, right? Action 1 is the pro-social action. It's the one which generates positive externalities for others. Action 0 is the neutral, the selfish action, if you will. And the payoff, the selfish action carries no benefits to anyone, neither any costs. So that payoff is 0, normalization. If an agent takes the pro-social action, A equal to 1, then it carries a cost, C, and some reward, Y, right? Y is the monetary reward. And an agent gets intrinsic payoff V from choosing the pro-social action. Okay, so the two, there's a cost, and there are two sources of benefits. One is the monetary reward, Y, That's the extrinsic motivation part. And the other is this V, which is the intrinsic motivation, right? The agent just gets it. That's not monetary. That's just the warm glow in your heart because you did the right thing. Now, the main thing is that V varies in the population. Not everybody has the same V. Some people have high V. They have a lot of intrinsic motivation. Some people have low V. They're more on the selfish side, right? They don't get much of a kick from acting pro-socially. So let's assume that V has some distribution, and that distribution is captured by this distribution function, capital F of V, right? A standard distribution. We could take normal distribution, exponential, what have you, right? You could put some functional form on that. But in general, it's F of V. So, as I said, if the agent chooses action 0, payoff is 0, normalized. If he chooses action 1, his net payoff is this, right? V is the intrinsic motivation, as I said. Y is the extrinsic motivation, the reward. C minus C, that we are taking away the cost. And then this is one last part, and that is what is capturing the kind of things that we were talking about. Mu times R. R is the reputational gain from acting pro-socially. The idea is that there are observers, there are onlookers. They see what you did, whether you chose action 0 or 1. And when you choose action 1, your reputation goes up by some amount R. I'll say in a moment what that means, right? But there's some reputational improvement. And mu is just a parameter. Mu captures how much you care about this reputational gain, right? We'll take mu to be the same for everyone. So very generous people and less generous people, all of them care equally about how they're perceived by others, right? You could make a more complex model where, there are multiple dimensions in which people vary. In this simple model, we'll just let V be different across different people, but everything else is the same for everyone. And mu is the common degree of concern about reputation. Now, as you can see, if V is higher, if intrinsic motivation is higher, the payoff from choosing the pro-social action is higher, right? So obviously, it's not at all hard to guess that when we try to characterize the equilibrium of this gain, there will be some threshold, right? So people whose V's are above some threshold, let's say V bar, they'll choose the pro-social action. And those who fall below the threshold, whose generosity is not strong enough, they'll choose action 0. Okay? Now, this threshold is going to be endogenous. This threshold will have to take a value so that everything fits and all of this becomes a perfect Bayesian equilibrium. Right? All of you with me, guys? Let me complete this last piece, and then I'll invite questions if there are any.
Sir,
now, yes.
Sir, I didn't get your point. Like a perfect Bayesian equilibrium. So how do we get that equilibrium?
I'm coming to that. I'll explain.
Okay.
It's the standard notion of a perfect Bayesian equilibrium, but I'll spell it out in just a moment.
Okay.
Perfect Bayesian equilibrium is Nash equilibrium for incomplete information games. Yeah. But I'll be more specific. Okay, let me finish my description of what the assumed payoffs are, right? So where is this R coming from? Everything else we can understand. R is kind of a little wishy-washy. Here's what R is. Basically, the onlookers, they'll observe your action. If you've chosen action 1, if you donated blood and, were a good citizen, and they saw you being a good citizen, acting like a good citizen, they immediately know that your V is above this threshold V bar, that your V is on the higher side. Okay? They may not be sure what exactly your V is, but they get some news, and it's good news about how much you care about others. So they calculate an expectation, right? Conditional on V being above V bar, the threshold, This is the conditional expectation of V, right? So when you act pro-socially, this is what people think on average your V is. When you don't act pro-socially, immediately they know that your V is below the threshold. And so they'll calculate another conditional expectation. And this difference is what we're calling R, the reputational gain, right? What's your image as far as the strength of a generosity is concerned when you act pro-socially, minus what's your image when you don't act pro-socially. That difference is your reputation payoff. That's R. And it's multiplied by the parameter which captures how much you care about R. That's mu. Okay. Questions at this point?
Sir, I didn't understand why there needs to be a V bar. Like a high enough Y could compensate for a low V, right?
Okay. So let's fix at this point. Let's fix a value of Y. Like in that experiment, they were offering $7 to donate blood, right? So Y has been frozen at $7.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Now some people have a more of a inclination to give it. They have the high V, and some people are more like, kya hai? So they have low V. Yeah. Now, if the money is enormous, if they're paying like $1 million, then V probably wouldn't matter. So the action gets interesting, or in other words, the threshold is interior if Y is neither too large nor too small. Yeah.
So we're taking it to be fixed here.
Yes, when we are thinking of people with different V's choosing different things, at that point we are holding the Y, the cost, everything the same. Once we understand the equilibrium, we'll do a comparative statics. We'll ask the question, what happens if Y is raised? Instead of $7, they're offering $10 or $15. What would happen? What can we expect? Right? That was what the debate was in that I was referring to in the real world in the 70s, right? So going from Britain to America is like going from a reward of $0 to $7. So from zero, not $7, whatever the Americans were paying, right? So that would be why in that context.
Okay, sir. Understood.
Shubham, you have a question?
So shouldn't there be a constant with V and Y also, like there we have with R? Like maybe I'm not that much altruistic, so I'm not giving that much weight to V.
Okay. So yes, as I said, people may care differentially about many different things. And in the second variant of the model, you will see that I bring in some differences on some of these other things, right? For example, there may be cost differences, right? So on the day of the blood camp, I am free. It's an off day for me, so I have time on my hands, but you have some important business meeting, you have a test or whatever, your cost is very high, right? So people can differ on that. That'll come in later. At this point, let's just keep things simple and focus on the intrinsic motivation part, which is captured by V, right? We'll only allow that to be different. Of course, you can want to sort of make a much richer model where there are multidimensional sort of heterogeneity. Let's start simple. Yeah.
Okay, sir.
Sir?
Yes.
So in this case, if R increases, then the payoff increases, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So, sir, there can be people, right, who generally don't like many onlookers and they tend to do their work more silently. So,
Sure.
so how do we?
Again, that is a heterogeneity. If you want to capture that sort of difference in preferences, then you have to start saying that, oh, mu is not the same for everyone. It's different for different people. For some people, it may even be negative, whatever, right?
Okay.
Again, we'll keep all these different guys similar in most aspects. We'll just, at least as a starting point, we'll just allow them to be different from each other with respect to the strength of their generosity. Everything else we'll assume to be the same, right? As I said, I'll add some more complications as we go along. Indeed, for one of our results, namely the crowding out effect, with the current assumptions that I just laid down on this slide, you won't get the crowding out effect. So we'll have to introduce some of these other variations that you guys are clamoring for, but I'm coming to that, right?
Sir?
Yes.
So just to get an understanding of the reputation element here, it's basically others' assessment of my generosity or my intrinsic motivation, and there is no objective with which I'm valuing this factor. I mean, I'm valuing reputation for its own sake.
Okay, so you can, we'll be agnostic about that in this model, right? It can be both, and we can think of situations, right? Who doesn't care about, people thinking well of us? But depending on the setting, sometimes there's an instrumental reason why I want people to think well of me. If I'm an employee in a company and I want raises and promotions, then I care about my image as somebody who's hardworking and creative and energetic and works well with others for instrumental reason, not for its own sake. So it can be either. It can be either, right? It doesn't make a difference. There's a section at the end, if you have looked at the syllabus, there's a section called reputation, right? And there are papers where this kind of reputational concern is for more professional, instrumental reasons. For example, stock market, pundits who make predictions about various stocks, sell this, buy that, hold this, etc., etc. They're extremely worried about their reputations as reliable market gurus and predictors because of their future earnings, right? If their reputation takes a hit, people won't buy their advice, they won't give them their money to invest, and they'll lose income. For now, we'll just take it as given. We haven't modeled in some of these papers that I just mentioned, which will come later. They actually build up, if you will, this sort of function from that sort of future business interest, right? Right now, let's think of it as just a psychological, I just want to look good. Yeah. It's not essential, but we'll keep things simple to and assume that.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. Okay, so now let's play around with a couple of distributions, right? Simplest of distributions are our very dear and close friend. You'll meet this distribution time and again because many calculations become very, very simple. Uniform distribution. So first, V is uniformly distributed on the 0-1 interval, let's say. Okay. Now, the main task is to identify the cutoff. And the cutoff, we want the cutoff, that V bar, right? Above that, people are pro-social. Below that, people are selfish, or at least their actions are. What characterizes that cutoff, right? What has to hold true at that cutoff? Well, the indifference property, right? All models where you have these cutoffs, one side people choose one action, other side some other action. At the cutoff, they must be indifferent between the two actions. Otherwise, it wouldn't be the cutoff, right? So this has to be true for the cutoff guys. So if my V is exactly that cutoff value V bar, then I'm indifferent. That means that my overall benefit, this is the intrinsic reward, this is the reputational reward, and this is the extrinsic reward. So these three rewards add up to the cost of doing the pro-social thing for me. That's why I'm indifferent, right? So this benefit as a function of the cutoff, let's call it phi. So that's a function I've just defined, right? Which says that if the cutoff is V bar, what's the net benefit, what's the gross benefit of the cutoff guy, right? And that gross benefit will always have to be equal to the cost if this thing has to work out as an equilibrium, right? And it's trivial that, if V is a little bit lower, then the benefit will fall short of the cost. And if V is a little bit higher, then it'll be higher than the cost. Okay, so let's work it out for a uniform distribution. All that we need to do is take the uniform distribution and calculate this R reputational kick as a function of the cutoff V bar, right? So let's calculate it. You remember how I defined it. Basically, somebody who does the pro-social action, I see Arnav did the pro-social thing, acted like a nice guy. So I say, oh, his V is between 1 and V bar. What's the expected value for the uniform distribution? It's this. This is the density function of the conditional distribution, right? Remember that for any uniform distribution, the density is 1 over the length of the line, right? Length of the domain. So that's it. But it's really very simple. We don't have to even do the integration, right? If it's uniform distribution, the expected value for any interval is the midpoint, right? So whoever acted pro-socially lies between V bar and 1. So the expected value is the average of V bar and 1, which is 1 plus V bar by 2. Whoever didn't act pro-socially, so Arnav acted very nice, and you guys saw me, I came and I just was selfish, and you all point fingers at me and you say, oh, Sir's payoff V is below V bar, is on the lower side of generosity. On average, in expected terms, how much? Well, the average of 0 and V bar, which is V bar by 2. So this is 1 plus V bar by 2. This is V bar by 2. What is the difference? Half. So that's what appears here, right? Okay. So this indifference condition immediately coupled with, the uniform distribution and our calculation of the reputation function for uniform distribution. For uniform distribution, it's just a constant, it's half. You switch your action from 0 to 1, your reputation jumps by half, right? The expected value of V that people ascribe to you jumps by half. So you have this, and that equals C, immediately tells you what V bar is, right? Let me draw a picture.
Sir.
Yes.
Sir, so you assume the uniform distribution, like you are giving the same probability to each of the value of the V's. Like is this assumption like any specific any
No, it's an
specific reason for
illustration.
this?
It's an illustration. I will next show you another distribution and how it works out there, right?
Okay.
I'm just talking of various possibilities, what might happen, what kind of equilibrium we might get, right? So just to illustrate that. So for the uniform distribution, so the way, we'll try to understand it in pictures, we'll draw a picture. C is captured by a flat line, right? At the left-hand side, this phi of V bar function. Remember, V bar is not any arbitrary V. V bar is the supposed cutoff, right? So we'll slide around the cutoff and see how the phi function is affected, right? So now the equation is very, very simple, right? It's basically a rising, it's a linear function. This is the intercept term, and the slope is 1. And so one possible graph is like this, right? Here's our phi V, the red line, and it intersects C here. So here there's indifference, right? And so this V star we have identified is the equilibrium value of V bar, the cutoff. So people to the right of it act pro-socially, people to the left of it don't, right? Now, in this model, it's possible to have corner equilibria also, right? In this case, the equilibrium is unique, given by V star. That's why the cutoff necessarily has to fall, right? Not at 0, not at 1, not at any other point. And it's kind of stable. So let me try to explain to you, if you sort of just think of dynamic extension, it's stable in the following sense. Suppose initially the cutoff is to the left of V star, right? Somewhere here. You can see the mouse pointer.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So suppose the cutoff is here, right? Now, what would be true then? If the cutoff is somewhere here, if you go up to the red line, that's the benefit curve. The flat line is the cost curve, right? So that means at the cutoff, the benefit is less than the cost. So the guys sitting on the cutoff are not indifferent. They actually strictly prefer not acting pro-socially. Okay? So they'll strictly switch to action 0. Not only that, people slightly to the right of them will also find the benefit less than the cost, and they'll also start switching to action 0, right? So if we start with a cutoff to the left, that cutoff is going to move towards V star, because people in that vicinity will join the 0 club. They'll join the non-pro-social club. They'll join the anti-social club, right? And so the set of anti-social behaviors will expand. And the same logic will apply if the cutoff were to the right, right? There, the cutoff point will move to the left. That value won't be an equilibrium value. It'll move to the left until it hits V star. So V star is nice, it's stable, right? Even if the perception in society was that the cutoff is not V star, but something a little higher or a little lower, through experience, that perception will change and behavior will change until the cutoff hits V star. Okay, is everybody questions here at this point? Is that clear? So there's a unique equilibrium in this case with a uniform distribution where the cutoff is V star and it's given by the equation we had, right? So the equilibrium value of V star is given by the solution to this equation, right? C minus Y minus mu by 2. Now, remember the 2 main points I was talking about. What were the points? What did I say are the 2 main messages of the paper? One is that there can be multiple equilibria in these sorts of games, right? 2 identical societies whose parameters are the same could end up with very different behavior patterns. In one society, lots of people are pro-social, they act nice, they donate blood, do all the good things. In another society, there's all kinds of bad behavior, right? So multiple equilibria is a possibility. Do we see that here?
No.
We don't. In this particular case, there's a unique equilibrium, right? And Mayuk is especially unhappy. Mayuk was, that's why.
I think we will get a multiple equilibria if we assume another distribution function, right?
Right. So now you're anticipating that. Yeah, exactly. But when you said, uniform distribution, why do we look at uniform distribution? It's bad. It's not showing us that multiplicity. And let's think about the other effect, crowding out. Is that happening here? So let's increase the monetary reward. What happens to this function? If y goes up, the intercept term is bigger, right? That means that this benefit curve moves up like this. Yeah, that means the equilibrium cutoff V star moves to the left. So what happens to the extent of pro-social behavior? Remember, everybody above the cutoff acts nice. So if the cutoff has moved left, then the set of people who act nice has expanded. You offered more money, more people are acting nice. Big deal. We have wasted our time studying this model. No multiple equilibria, no crowding out effect, isn't it? Yeah. Well, as Mayuk was saying, why uniform distribution? Well, no particular reason. God knows what the distribution of these things are like. Let's consider some other distribution, right? We'll take a convex distribution. The distribution function is v squared. So density function is 2v, right? Derivative of this. Let's do the calculations. Let's find the equilibrium, right? Just a little simple maths.
Sir, just a one point.
Yeah.
Sir, you were saying that we are giving a monetary reward to the uh, agency here. So the fun- cup 5v function is going up, right? So the v star is moving to the left.
Yeah.
So if I think about like the government is giving a monetary reward at this time, but they are compensating that for a tax like a tax imposition in future. So that will affect the like a result in this model.
No, of course it will reward. I mean, when I write, I mean, the model is of course very simple and bare bones, right? If you're thinking of a more complicated scenario and trying to sort of fit it into this model, then y has to be the sort of net present value of the entire stream of rewards and fines and taxes and penalties, everything all clubbed together, right? So if the government is offering 100 rupees today and will take 500 rupees from your pocket tomorrow, then what matters to you is the minus 400 or whatever the present discounted value. So we don't need to unpack what went into the calculation of y, right? Y is the summary statistic of what the reward is, right? All its components added up.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so now for this, just mechanically, let's calculate it. This is what is the conditional expectation given that v is above the threshold? That's this part, right? And that's that part. So you can just check the maths. I won't do it, step by step. You guys know it from your statistics, basic statistics. So when you do the calculation, you get this. This difference works out to be, after you do all the integration and all, this expression. Okay. So now note that it's not a constant anymore. For the uniform distribution, it was no matter where you drew the threshold, the reputational gap between pro-social actors and antisocial actors was always a constant half. That's no longer true. Now that difference becomes a non-trivial function of V bar, right? So now we have the same kind of equilibrium condition. The indifference, if the guy at the threshold is to be indifferent, then this has to hold true, right? This is his V, this is his reputational gain, this is his extrinsic reward, that equals cost. So if you plot this graph, you find that, first of all, it's downward sloping now, right? Now, the fact that it's downward sloping has implications. So let's pause and think for a moment. Of course, there's an intersection, right? Well, if it starts above, there will be an intersection. So that seems like a candidate for an equilibrium. But remember this little stability analysis that we did, okay? With a positive slope, the stability property is right. And you can sort of replicate that reasoning, and you will find that, if this were downward sloping, then instead of the arrows going inside, right? Instead of, if a threshold was to the left, it'll start moving in. We'll have the opposite kind of movements, right? So if this is downward sloping, as we have, then if we start with the threshold a little bit to the left of V star, that threshold will move further away, right? You can quickly run it through your mind. So suppose the threshold initially is expected to be here. Then the guys sitting at the threshold find benefits strictly greater than costs. So they're very happy. They strictly prefer acting pro-socially, And so their neighbors slightly to the left will also find pro-social actions better. So the threshold moves towards this corner. And similarly, if the threshold started here, it'll start moving towards 1. So now you can see actually the threshold at 0 and the threshold at 1 are also equilibrium, right? Suppose the threshold is 0. What does that mean? Literally everyone is supposed to be acting pro-socially, right? If that is the case, then the guy with V equal to 0, even that guy, the least generous guy, finds the benefit to be more than the cost. So even the least generous guy is happy to do so, act pro-socially. And if you go to the other end, here the threshold is supposed to be at 1. And so that means that everybody is supposed to act anti-socially. Nobody is pro-social. Well, then even the most generous guy finds the benefit to be less than the cost. So even the most generous guy will not switch from antisocial to pro-social behavior, right? So we have 3 equilibria. We have an equilibrium in which everybody acts pro-socially, that's this corner. We have another equilibrium where nobody acts pro-socially, that's this corner. These 2 equilibria are stable. We have an equilibrium in the middle, which is an interior equilibrium where the indifference condition holds, but it's an unstable equilibrium. If somehow the threshold moves even slightly left or right, then it doesn't come back. It moves towards the corner. Okay? So let's understand more intuitively what's going on here. If in society we have all kinds of gestures, right? Let's look at the simplest of things, right? All our actions are pregnant with meaning, right? But let's think of sort of pure gestures. Yeah, you meet some people in a social occasion, you do your namaste, right? You touch the feet of your elders as a mark of respect. In India, we do our namaste. In the West, they do their handshakes, right? Nowadays, they have switched to namaste, but traditionally. So these gestures have no direct payoff relevance, right? I mean, if I do this, that won't feed you, that won't increase your bank balance, that won't earn you more marks. It's just an empty gesture, right? But in society, it's an important gesture, right? If I fail to do the right gestures, a Nobel laureate comes to Delhi school and I don't do my namaste and my right gestures, that will be perceived terribly. Yeah. Why? Yeah. If I steal someone's wallet, then I can see the reason why it's perceived terribly, right? I pick your pocket and you're very upset, of course, because I've taken your stuff. But if I don't do namaste to you, why are you upset? That's because they've become meaningful focal points, right? It is supposed to convey respect and fellow feeling, whatever. And somebody who doesn't do it is now. So you can see the multiple equilibria in pure gestures, pay off irrelevant, trivial actions like hand gestures. Yeah, even in such empty things, we can have this sort of multiplicity. But often, whether an action is perceived to be good, the sign of a good person, a generous person, a person who cares about others, right? Instead of attaching itself to meaningless gestures, sometimes it attaches itself to pay off relevant actions, right? So a person who doesn't throw a lavish wedding, when getting married, or their children are getting married, is perceived to be not a good citizen, right? And then, if that's the expectation, that's the norm, then a lot of people will latch on to it and act accordingly. But the action to which they're latching on is not as innocuous and costless and payoff irrelevant as hand gestures. It's a very costly affair, right? So, in societies, norms emerge about what is considered the sign of a good person. And sometimes these norms involve, as I said, costless things. Sometimes they involve very costly things, right? Like throwing lavish weddings and very wasteful ways to prove that you're a good citizen, that you care about your neighbors and your relatives and so on. But sometimes they may also attach themselves to good things, right? Sometimes the norm of being a good person attaches itself to things like, do you donate a lot to charity? Do you give blood? Do you help out in the neighborhood? Do you teach children from underprivileged families, from the neighborhood, communities? Do you help out your neighbors in need, etc.? Right. So the mark of a good person sometimes is not in empty hand gestures or costly things like throwing lavish parties, but in doing this sort of community service or helping out others. And then that turns out to be something good for society, right? So if goodness attaches itself to actions with positive externalities, then the overall social effect is good. And if it attaches to negative externalities, then it's bad, right? And so in some society, they may develop, when people are trying to prove that they're good citizens, the norm may develop that they prove it through helping out in the soup kitchens and teaching the poor kids. When people see that, they say, oh, that is a good person. In another society with the same fundamentals, the norm may develop that to prove that you're a good person, you have to throw lavish, wasteful parties. When people see that, they say, oh, that's a good, generous person, right? But they're lavish, wasteful parties, right? The poor kids are not being taught, a lot of money being burnt. So that's the multiplicity, right? In pure hand gestures, this is so, beware of disequilibrium, right? This is our president, former president, Pratibha Patil, with a Turkish prime minister, Turkish president, I think. So each is doing their own cultural norm. Questions?
So, when do we have like a kind of unstable equilibrium? So, what should be the strategy to mitigate the instability in that case? Like, what should be our strategy?
Well, if it's an unstable equilibrium, we don't have to worry about it. I mean, the idea is that unstable equilibria do not persist. So in this picture, if the society looked like this, then the equilibrium will either be at 0 or at 1. So the sort of more pertinent question is that if we find ourselves in, let's say, this equilibrium, this is a bad equilibrium, nobody's acting pro-socially, right? We're not helping each other, we haven't developed social norms of, teaching the poor kids or donating blood and so on. Okay, those norms are absent in our society. Now, it's possible for the same attitudes, for the same value systems, for the same group of people to play out another equilibrium where which is 0, right? Where everybody's acting pro-socially. So collectively, we may sit down and just bemoan the fact that we are trapped in a bad equilibrium. how do we get to a good equilibrium, right? And the bad equilibrium persists because no one person can break it. In the bad equilibrium, what's happening is, you do all these good acts, like donating blood and helping out people and teaching the kids. Nobody notices, nobody reads any meaning into it, right? So you don't get that reputational kick. Nobody says, oh, Mayuk is such a wonderful guy, right? So the society has gotten trapped in that sort of thing. Generous acts don't carry salience or significance or reputational advantage, and nobody does them as a result. Yeah.
In this kind of cases, like we are saying that the equilibrium, like a middle equilibrium, is unstable, and we have a corner solution, like either this 0 or the 1.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty extreme case. Like so you have to be very good or you have to be very bad. There is no middle point. Like
yeah, I mean, it's not one person has to be very good or very bad. It's that everyone in the bad equilibrium, nobody acts pro-socially or generously, and it is an equilibrium behavior pattern. And in the good equilibrium, everybody, even the least general people, because of reputational pressure, they act generously, right? And the same society can end up here or end up there. And if they end up in the bad equilibrium, they'll wonder, how can we get there? And unilateral deviations will not take you there, right?
okay.
So that's a complicated question always in multiple equilibrium models, right? That how, and there's lots of literature and lots of, you can think of policy interventions, you can think of what in learning literature they call mutations. Sometimes some people just, they didn't think too much. They just started acting generously. They started giving blood, etc. And if that sort of shock is large enough, it may take them beyond the threshold and dislodge them to the other equilibria. What are the chances of that happening? Anyway, there's a big, but that is always, this is what all coordination failures are like. When we are in a recession, what's happening? Labor is lying idle, capital is lying idle. We know that 2 years ago, our economy was booming with the same technology, with the same human capital. We were growing at 8%, and now our growth has stalled, right? We have the capacity to grow at 8%, but we can't because we have slipped to a bad equilibrium. That sort of problem is not easy to solve, right? So I won't say much here right now, but that's why multiple equilibrium models are interesting. It shows that good and bad things can both arise in a self-fulfilling manner.
So one more thing, when you were choosing a distribution function, like in the first case you chose like a uniform distribution, in the second case you chose a convex distribution. So what kind of evidence you were suggesting to look at before choosing a distribution function, like a data set or some evidence?
None.
Like, how do we know?
The simple answer is none. The point isn't
Okay.
an empirical prediction or a realistic thing. The point is to show you logical possibilities that under these assumptions, multiple equilibria can arise.
Okay.
On purely theoretical grounds, there's full disclosure. I showed you two distributions. In one case, equilibrium was unique. In another case, it's multiple equilibria. So there's no claim that there'll always be multiple equilibria. It's a possibility. If you want to seriously take it to some real world situation, we don't know if there will be low-level equilibrium traps. Then we have to start looking at data, figure out the distributions, depending on the application. Theory tells us what things are possible and under what situations some certain phenomena may arise, under what situations they may not arise, that sort of thing. Theory gives us largely if-then kind of statements, right?
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Sir?
Yeah.
Well, in this particular scenario, say if we are in the bad equilibrium, Sir, can increasing y by a good amount take me to the good equilibrium and keep me there after?
Yeah.
So
Okay.
can it be a policy intervention in this case?
So how does this curve shift if we increase
It,
the reward?
so it will shift upwards, right?
Shift upwards, right? Now, this interior equilibrium moves out, but we don't want to pay attention to the interior equilibrium because it's unstable, right?
Yes.
The two corner equilibria, if you shift this up a little bit, the two corner equilibria are still there. So if you are stuck in the bad corner, you're still stuck there, really, right? But if you add enough,
Yes.
if you give a big enough carrot,
Yes.
then this corner equilibrium becomes destroyed because the entire curve is above C. And in that case, the only equilibrium is at zero, which is the good equilibrium. So yes.
And thereafter, even if I reduce y, then also I'll remain at good equilibrium, right?
Well, if you have pushed it up far, then you have room, you have overshot, so you can reduce y a little bit. So small improvements, small increases in the reward won't make a difference, right? But large enough increases will destroy the bad equilibrium.
No, so if I increase it by large amount and then I bring it back to the original level of y, then also I'll remain in the good?
No, this is a one-shot static model. So that means that, if you're just doing comparative statics, so yesterday you had a big reward, today you brought it down and made it very small. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. In these sorts of models, with a bit of hand waving, what people often say is that, look, the point is, even a temporary, think of this playing out over multiple periods, even a temporary intervention may have long-term benefits even after that intervention has been removed, right? We saw the daycare experiment and all, where we saw evidence to that effect. Yeah. And that might happen here, right? So imagine we are trapped here, and for some time the reward is increased and the curve shifts up significantly, right? So this gets broken. So all of us flock to good behavior, and now we are playing the good equilibrium, right? And now the reward comes down. Presumably we'll continue to play the good equilibrium, right? With a little bit of hand waving, we can sort of heuristically claim something like that. So you can destroy the bad equilibrium in the long run, by temporarily in the short run destroying it. Yes. So one can kind of make it, because it breaks a habit in which we were trapped. And once we are out of the habit, even if you take away the sweeteners, we are now locked into good habit, and that will persist.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Anything else? Okay, so I was hoping to finish this, but I've run out of time. So the remaining thing to discuss is really the most important thing, which is how can it be the case in this sort of model that extrinsic, rewards can crowd out intrinsic motivation? Can that arise? In the version of the model that we just saw, that cannot arise, right? So even what we just discussed, this increment in reward can only destroy the bad equilibrium, not the good equilibrium, right? So we have to change and tinker with the model a little bit, and what will be what will be required is introduce some heterogeneity in some other aspect, and specifically we'll target the cost. So that's what I'll show you in the next lecture, which is Monday. Okay. Any other questions?
Sir, I have one question from the previous lecture. like lecture you gave before today. So
Okay, so let me finish this. Let me stop sharing
okay.
this one, and let me stop the recording.